The flight from Dallas to San Francisco was supposed to be quiet, smooth, forgettable, even. But it became anything but. Julian Ross leaned back in seat 3A, eyes half-lidded, the subtle hum of the aircraft blending with the occasional clink of champagne flutes. The polished leather of first class cushioned him like a throne, and for a moment he allowed himself the illusion of peace. He wasn't here for leisure. This was work, but the kind of work that required stillness, observation, and above all, invisibility. As a federal air marshal, Julian had learned to blend in, to become part of the furniture. To be ignored was a gift, until the slap shattered everything. A crack of flesh on flesh rang out like a whip. Conversations died mid-sentence. A woman's gasp choked off in the back row. Even a flight attendant's froze. Julian didn't move. His training didn't allow for flinching. He watched. Standing in the aisle was a woman in her early 60s, platinum hair curled to perfection, mouth taut with fury. Her name was Elaine Whitmore, and she was glaring down at the man she had just struck. Her fingers pointed sharply, like weapons of their own. "You people think you can just sit wherever you want," she hissed, voice low but acidic. "This cabin isn't for everyone." The man she'd hired, a young black passenger, no more than 20, eyes wide with disbelief, sat stunned, one hand resting on the red imprint blossoming on his cheek. He looked around, unsure whether he'd just been assaulted or imagined it. Julian's eyes flicked to the flight attendant nearest to the scene, a woman named Cassandra, who seemed paralyzed by indecision. He turned back to Elaine, whose hands were still shaking. "Ma'am," Julian said quietly, his voice calm as the still sky outside. "You need to return to your seat." Elaine turned her rage toward him, momentarily confused. "And who are you?" Julian didn't answer. He didn't need to. His posture said everything. Authority radiated from him, not the brute kind, not the loud kind. The kind that filled silence like water poured into a glass. The kind that made people listen. Elaine's mouth opened again, but no sound came. She blinked, and in that blink something shifted. She sat down. The entire cabin exhaled. Seated across the aisle, Grace Lanning had seen it all unfold. She was a litigation consultant, razor-sharp, recently retired from decades of corporate trench warfare. She had flown more miles than she cared to count, but never had she witnessed a moment like this. The power dynamic hadn't shifted with volume or aggression. It had shifted with presence. Julian returned to his seat, not even bothering to look back. He picked up his book, flipped a page, as if nothing had happened. But Grace was transfixed. She stared at him for several seconds, longer than polite society would allow. Who was this man? 3 rows back, a teenage girl watched too. Her name was Isabel Reyes. 17, bright-eyed, anxious. She was on her way to a college interview at Berkeley, her first time flying alone, her first time in first class, thanks to her father's frequent flyer miles. Everything about this cabin felt foreign. The soft lighting, the linen napkins, the hushed conversations about hedge funds and vineyard acquisitions. But Julian Ross made it feel different. When Elaine had launched into her tirade, Isabel had shrunk into her seat, ready for the explosion. Instead, she had watched calm win. No shouting, no threats, just control, embodied in a single man. The flight continued. Elaine Whitmore didn't say another word. Julian didn't move a muscle that he didn't mean to. And both Grace and Isabel watched. By the time the plane leveled at cruising altitude, the tension had begun to dissipate, like ripples from a stone settling back into still water. But for the 3 of them, Grace, Julian, and Isabel, the disturbance had done something more lasting. It had awakened something. Grace ordered another glass of wine, but found herself sipping less. She glanced over at Julian from time to time, noting the subtle ways he scanned the cabin. Not nervously, but efficiently. He wasn't checking for threats. He was memorizing the room, the layout, the faces. An agent, she realized, or something close. She'd spent years arguing with federal prosecutors, mediating billion-dollar lawsuits. She had known men like him, though rarely this composed and never this quiet. Julian didn't wear his badge on his sleeve. He wore it in his stillness. She admired that. Isabel, meanwhile, was scribbling something into a worn notebook she always carried. She hadn't told her father how scared she was to make this trip alone. She hadn't even told her friends she was applying to Berkeley. Part of her still didn't believe she deserved to sit among these people in fine suits and subtle watches. But seeing Julian handle Elaine made her feel like she did. It made her feel like there was a way to belong without having to prove it. That strength could be gentle. That confidence didn't always announce itself. Midway through the flight, turbulence hit. It was mild, but enough to jostle a few drinks. A woman in 2D squealed and clutched her pearls. The man beside her grunted. Julian barely looked up. But again, Grace noticed. His hand moved instinctively to his armrest, bracing as if for more than just turbulence. He was always ready. Grace leaned across the aisle slightly. "You don't strike me as a vacationer." Julian turned, offering a hint of a smile. "Does anyone in first class actually vacation anymore?" "Touché," she said, lifting her glass. "Just traveling," he said, and left it at that. But Isabel's curiosity got the better of her. "What you did earlier," she said, her voice soft but clear. "How did you stay so calm?" Julian looked at her. Something in her eyes, hope, maybe, or uncertainty, made him answer with more than a deflection. "I've seen worse," he said. "When you know how bad it can get, you learn to stop it before it starts." Isabel nodded slowly, writing that down in her mind more than on paper. Grace studied him anew. There was something sacred in that simplicity. He didn't grandstand. He didn't justify. He just was. By hour 3, the cabin lights dimmed. Most passengers pulled out blankets and masks. But the three of them remained awake, oddly connected in a space meant to keep strangers apart. Julian finally asked Grace, "You're a lawyer?" "Retired. But guilty as charged." He nodded. "You read people. That must have helped." "All the time. Especially when it's someone who thinks they're smarter than the room." "And now I try to remember that not everything is a case to be won. Some things just need to be understood." Julian liked that. Isabel listened, absorbing every word like gospel. To her, these were the kinds of adults she wanted to become: grounded, graceful, unshaken by chaos. They talked a little more. Nothing dramatic. No secrets shared. Just three people quietly redefining what it meant to be strong, to belong, to matter. By the time the plane began its descent, something had changed. Julian remained in his seat until the last passenger disembarked. He always did. It was part of the protocol, sure, but it was also who he was. Last out, just in case. As Grace walked past him, she paused. "You ever think about teaching people what you do?" she asked. "We need more of that kind of calm in the world." He smiled. "I think we all teach, whether we mean to or not." She nodded and left. Isabel came next. She looked at him, nervous again, but steadier than before. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For showing me I don't have to be loud to be powerful." Julian didn't answer. He just nodded once deeply, and then he was alone. 30 minutes later, at the terminal, Grace checked her email and found a message from a former client and offered to come back for one more case. She started to type a refusal, then paused. Maybe there was still more she could teach. Isabel stood outside her interview building in Berkeley later that afternoon, notebook in hand, heart thudding. She flipped to a blank page. At the top, she wrote, "Lead like Julian." Then she walked in, and Julian? He boarded another flight the next morning. Different city, different cabin, same mission, but somewhere between 35,000 feet and the endless hum of human noise, 3 lives had shifted. Just a little. Just enough. Proof that not all journeys are about where you land. Some are about who you become at 30,000 feet.